Egypt's currency has fallen about 50% in a span of 2 years. What's happening right now to its economy is fascinating, so let's break it down. Right now it's faced with an overvalued currency, weak property rights, and its state and military have been deterring investment and competition. A borrowing spree under its president has left Egypt with heavy foreign debt. So what exactly is causing all this commotion? Well, see, Egypt heavily relies on imports, especially for essentials like food and fuel. But the global prices of these commodities have been skyrocketing, especially due to the war in Ukraine. This surge in prices translates to a ballooning import bill for Egypt. And on the flip side, Egypt's traditional sources of income like tourism and revenue from the Suez Canal have also taken substantial hits. And with the ongoing conflict discouraging tourists and the attacks on the Suez Canal disrupting trade, Egypt's revenue streams have significantly gone down. And the kicker, Egypt finds itself burdened with a massive debt that accounts for over 42% of its GDP. This debt is weighing heavily on Egypt's economic prospects, and that's making it really hard for it to recover. And not just that, but a significant portion of its debt needs to be repaid soon to avoid further financial distress. But hold up, how did Egypt's economic journey take such a turbulent turn? Well, it all began during the relatively stable times in 2022 when Egypt managed to weather the storm of the COVID-19 pandemic better than anticipated. But the eruption of the conflict in Ukraine disrupted this equilibrium, setting off a domino effect for economic challenges for Egypt. Then the war-induced surge in global prices triggered a corresponding spike in Egypt's import expenditures, which ultimately started to strain its foreign reserves. Meanwhile, foreign investors became skeptical and started to withdraw investments because of Egypt's shrinking reserves, which ultimately intensified pressure on its currency, the Egyptian pound. The currency depreciated sharply, leading to a surge in inflation and eroding purchasing power. You can see how this domino effect happened, and the effects of Egypt's economic crisis have rippled throughout society, especially affecting low-income households. See, inflation rates soared, reaching a staggering 13% in March 2024. Essential food items saw a sharp price escalation of over 20%, making them crazy unaffordable for vulnerable segments of society. And rising fuel prices drove up transportation costs, further squeezing household budgets. So in response to all of this economic downturn, Egypt has started to do a series of measures that aim at stabilizing its economy and hopefully recovering. And there was a massive development when Egypt got a $5 billion loan package from the International Monetary Fund. This was in March 2024, but this financial assistance comes with a lot of conditions, like measures like cutting government spending and reducing subsidies on essential commodities like bread and fuel. And the IMF has advocated for a more flexible exchange rate regime because they want to attract foreign investment, but this would risk short-term inflationary pressures. Additionally, Egypt is urged to create a conducive environment for private sector investment by reducing regulatory barriers and so many bureaucratic inefficiencies. While the IMF loan provides immediate relief, Egypt must adopt a multifaceted approach to make sure that there is sustainable economic recovery. See, apart from external financial assistance, exploring domestic avenues for revenue generation and structural reforms is going to be super important. They're going to have to diversify the economy, enhance productivity, and ultimately promote innovation that can bolster Egypt's resilience to external shocks and pave the way for long-term prosperity. But let's take a deeper dive into this recent roller coaster. For one, there's the devaluation and inflation. The years leading up to 2023 saw the Egyptian pound experience a period of relative stability, but the global economic shocks of 2023, especially the war in Ukraine, triggered this whole new wave of volatility. So after all this pressure on the pound's value, in March 2024, the Egyptian government devalued the currency by allowing a more flexible exchange rate. Now, this aims at making Egyptian exports more competitive because they become more affordable, but it also has a downside. The devaluation of the pound has a significant impact on inflation because remember, Egypt relies heavily on imports, so a weaker pound translates to higher import costs. And this in turn pushed up prices of everyday goods and services across the board, squeezing household budgets. For example, imagine a kilo of sugar that previously cost 10 Egyptian pounds when the exchange rate was stronger. Now with a weaker pound, the same amount of foreign currency might be needed to buy less sugar, potentially inflating the price to 12 or 15 pounds, or even higher. This phenomenon is playing out across essential goods, impacting everyone from low-income families to middle-class consumers. And then there's the black market rate and the search for alternatives, which also caused a devaluation because individuals began trade currencies outside of the official channels. This ultimately undermines the effectiveness of official exchange rates and creates uncertainty in the financial financial system. Recognizing this risk, the Egyptian government is taking steps to crack down on black market activities and obviously use official channels for currency exchange. So what happens next? Well, the future of the Egyptian pound remains uncertain. Successfully managing the current crisis requires a delicate balancing act. The government needs to find ways to curb inflation without resorting to strict capital controls that might deter foreign investment. And to diversify the economy, it's going to need long-term solutions. This could involve promoting domestic food production, developing renewable energy sources to lessen reliance on imported fuel, and just fostering a more vibrant manufacturing sector to increase exports. The pound is resilient, and this is a symbol of hope. See, despite the recent challenges, the Egyptian pound has had a long history of resilience. If the country implements sound economic policies and fosters a more diversified economy, then Egypt can weather the current storm and ensure some stability. Another leak we've barely talked about is tourism. See, this was a big source of income for Egypt, and that's taken a nosedive. I mean, who's gonna go on a vacation when there's a war nearby? And less tourism means less money flowing into the bucket. So earlier I mentioned the IMF has come in. Now the IMF is kind of like a global loan shark, but hopefully with better interest rates. Now the IMF gave them the $5 billion loan, but remember, the IMF doesn't just hand out free money. They want Egypt to get their finances in order, which means some tough choices. Egypt needs to cut back on spending, like those fancy new government buildings in its new capital. In fact, a lot of people criticize Egypt for spending so much money on this new capital. I actually made an entire video about this where I actually explored the new capital. At the time, it was a ghost town. Nobody was living there yet, and most people I talked to were so skeptical, saying not many people want to go live there. So it's a classic example of build it and will they come? But make sure you watch that video because you will learn so much about Egypt. So will this IMF loan fix everything? Well, it's not a magic money wand, but it's a good start. See, Egypt still needs to plug the other leaks, like finding more ways to grow food at home and relying less on imported fuel. The road ahead is bumpy, but with some smart moves and a little bit of luck, Egypt might be able to avert this crisis into going further. But let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think is the problem, and what does Egypt need to do to fix this? And if you enjoyed this explainer, make sure you subscribe for more videos like this, and don't forget to check out my other videos at Uptin.